It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good afternoon, all. Craig, while we mainly deal with domestic politics here on Fromm and Fuller, it seems to me that Joe Biden is facing a unique leadership challenge as Russia continues to move troops close to the Ukraine border with the implied threat to invade the country if President Vladimir Putin's demands, including not allowing Ukraine to join NATO, are not met by the United States and the EU. One can debate how serious Putin is with this threat, but all eyes seem to be on Joe Biden right now and how he handles this crisis. What's your sense of how he's doing on this? And if successful, could this performance improve his pretty dismal approval ratings and perhaps even impact the 2022 elections at all?
Clearly, this is a major test of the Biden administration. There's no doubt about that. Most presidents confront this foreign affairs challenge right when they're trying to deliver a clear message on domestic policy issues. George Herbert Walker Bush kind of relished the international and foreign affairs field more than many presidents, but I suspect that on the one hand, this is disruptive. On the other hand, this is what a president has to deal with, and that's multiple challenges from all fronts. It's probably too early to really judge the performance, although you have to say that the absence of military conflict so far is a big plus. The continued talks and diplomatic efforts, most of which I suspect go unseen by us. They're conducted through some back channels and other means. So time will tell whether this is one of those things that we all view as a positive or not. I do think that Biden and the administration get credit for holding together, which you would expect, certainly in the NATO countries. I think many throughout the world are ready to condemn Putin if he takes a severe, drastic military action. And it's not easy to hold these coalitions together. It doesn't just happen automatically. So he has to get credit for that. Some of the signals have been a little confusing with that comment in the press conference, possibly opening the door to a less dramatic intervention by Putin that was quickly, seemingly corrected by the Secretary of State. We've said before that this is a team on all sides, but I think certainly on the foreign policy side, a team of people who have worked with Biden and are close to Biden, and that ought to be an advantage for him. But people will judge how this is handled. And it's also, I think, a reminder that how fast things can change. For George W. Bush, suddenly he was dealing with terrorism and the country swung behind him. For George Herbert Walker Bush, suddenly he was dealing with an invasion in Kuwait and public opinion pulled behind him. So like we've said for so long, this is a long year ahead of us. Whether it's in November seen as a positive or negative, there's months ahead to tell. I do think that the administration has dealt with it, calmly, directly. And I think the biggest problem, and I think it's one the world recognizes, and is Putin. He deals with the world on kind of a zero-sum game. If we're gaining, he's losing. If that's how he views the world. So anything that can be detrimental to the United States, I think he sees as a gain for himself, and hopefully he'll take a very sober look at this before he goes further.
Al, what's your take? It seems like this is a real test for any president.
Yeah, so first of all, let me just say I visited Ukraine. My father was born in Tlusny, which is a small Ukrainian town near the Romanian border. And for those of you who are interested in Jewish history, That town is famous because it is the town where the Baal Shem Tov, the famous Jewish mystic and healer who is believed to be the founder of Hasidic Judaism, revealed himself. My background actually is the hotel which we stayed in Toulouse, not a 5-star. And my father got out at the age of 4 in 1914 as the Russian troops were occupying. And I'm sure that, or at least when we were there in 2011, in many ways, things hadn't changed. I'm not an expert on foreign policy, and Craig has had much more experience than that with that than I have. A lot of people actually say I'm not very diplomatic. But this Ukrainian crisis is very complicated. In December, it'll be the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Soviet Union. And Putin seems to, his goal, his hope, his dream, which he's not going to realize, is to put it back together. He's never thought of Ukraine as a legitimate country. And from what I can tell, what he wants to really do is to change the security arrangements in Europe. As Fiona Hill has written, he really probably wants to get the United States out of European security. And the way Putin operates is that he provokes crises. That's his only way, because Russia's a pretty weak nation in almost every other way. There's no economy. Italy has a greater GDP than Russia. He can't persuade anybody because nobody wants to follow his values. So the only way he can do is by sort of bullying, flexing his muscles. And his way is to push forward until he's stopped. He's tried this a couple of times before in 2008 and 2014. And really, the response to him was pretty tepid. And so like a football coach, he's going to try that same play until somebody stops him. For Biden, I think the big challenge is to be proactive rather than reactive. He's got a big challenge, and he seems to be doing pretty well on it so far, but we don't know, in keeping the NATO alliance together, because Germany in particular is really dependent on Russian gas. So that's a real challenge. As for the impact on the election, my guess is it's not going to make any difference.
It is interesting. Maybe this is more for Craig, but as we know, George H.W. Bush had a phenomenal success when he took on the Iraqis after they invaded Kuwait, and his popularity soared, and then it disappeared almost overnight.
Yeah, that was probably one of the fastest rises and declines of approval of a president that we've seen in a while. I know at the time, in talking with then President George Herbert Walker Bush, one of the things that was concerning was that he had dealt with this international crisis with Kuwait and Iraq so effectively and so rapidly that the inability to solve some of the domestic problems in a declining economy was actually more consequential in terms of the way the voters viewed him. But it goes to Al's point, and that is in November, people are going to vote a lot on their pocketbook, on the economy, on their health with respect to COVID. And while many, thoughtful people can talk about the importance of Ukraine and the place it holds in terms of maintaining some check on Russian interests and aggression, that is not what they'll be talking about in the suburbs around the country, on the farms and in factories. They're going to be talking about things that affect them. And so even while you might deal with these issues effectively, it doesn't necessarily mean a long-term gain. In this case, I think we, though, have to recognize that this administration cannot afford to have another one or two hiccups in terms of getting things accomplished. So in some ways, it's the failure to deal with it effectively, and that's a pretty strong term. But if people's perception is that the administration hasn't dealt with this effectively, that'll just be added to a list. So I hope that's not the case. I also must say that for the good of the country, there needs to be bipartisan support behind the administration in terms of what they're doing. This is, we have a tradition of leaving our politics, at the shoreline. This is not a time to try to posture and make political gains out of a very tough foreign policy crisis. And I hope my friends on the Republican side will can contain themselves so that this can be dealt with effectively.
Well, that's interesting you bring up because, of course, Al, you were saying Putin takes no prisoners. It seems like a lot of Republicans, or some Republicans, I should say, would be using this no matter what the outcome against Joe Biden these days.
I'm sure that Republicans will use, as you say, whatever outcome is, or try to use it to their advantage. But in fairness, Senator McConnell yesterday said he thought the administration was moving in the right direction. And I saw Senator Menendez, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Democrat, on Morning Joe this morning, talking about effort in the Foreign Relations Committee, which seems to be bipartisan, to do what he calls the mother of all sanctions bills. And the discussion now in obviously he didn't reveal anything, but from what I could tell, we're really debating whether or not there can be proactive sanctions rather than having to wait till the Russians did something, sort of proactive as a deterrence. And he implied there was some agreement, or they're moving toward an agreement on that. So hopefully, other than maybe in the fringes, it won't be, it won't be an issue that the Republicans will try to use either way. But Craig mentioned 1992, and one of the things that President Clinton said or thought at the end of 1991 was, even though that President Bush had such high approval ratings because of the first Iraq war or the Kuwait War, he said, things aren't really so good at home, and I think we can run on that. And I just was briefed on what I think is pretty good poll over the weekend, and what's concerning people more than anything else right now are three things. Well, inflation is the issue, and three things: groceries, fuel prices, and housing. Those are the three biggest concerns because of inflation. They're the things that hurt the middle class most directly. And so a little progress on that would do a lot more than anything that can happen in Ukraine.
Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thanks so much. We'll see you next week.